Welcome everyone, we are back, we are live. This is the Virtual Railroader Academy. As always, I'm Professor Casey, and I'd usually be throwing it to Professor Nick here. He had some obligations come up last minute, so he's out dealing with those. Maybe we may catch him later. Um, Maybe not. But we'll figure it out. But this is Railroad Etiquette: The Do's and Don'ts of Being Involved 204. So welcome everyone. We have a panel with us today to talk about railroad etiquette, because I didn't just want you guys to hear from me. I wanted you to hear from everybody, from all different parts of the industry. So with us today, we have Matt. He is the division manager for a California short line. We have Mark, content creator and shop and operations for the Colorado Railroad Museum. And Rick, VP Boston and Maine Historical Society, fireman for the Winnipesaukee Scenic Railroad. Welcome all of you.
Hey. Oh, howdy. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, we're happy to have you guys. So we're gonna be running a little excursion train today. So that should be pulling into the station here shortly. But yeah, well, it's railroad etiquette. Holy crap, that's a topic.
There's definitely a lot to cover.
There is. I suppose I should probably start with where I came up with this idea and how I got this panel together. Was running back in May, early on in the season. It had a new fireman, and on our railroad, it's shady on the engineer side after basically 12 o'clock. And I was on the ground oiling around and climbed back up into the cab, and he was sitting in my seat trying to cool off. So that's where all this stemmed from, was the notion of what you should know as a new person starting out, of don't sit in the engineer seat ever, period. That kind of annoyed me for the rest of the day, and I'm like, you know what, no one talks about this stuff. I should talk about it. And I got all of you wonderful people here with me to tell me about your experiences and your side of the world on railroading.
As soon as you brought up this topic, my head went to a very similar memory because, and you make a great point where nobody talks about this stuff, so you don't really know that you've just committed the biggest social sin on the railroad. You just, oh, okay, whatever, you don't know the thing, people don't talk about it, they assume that you'll just learn by watching, and sometimes that doesn't work out, and that can really mess things up for what your experience is socially. We had a volunteer at the museum long time ago. New volunteer, super excited, knew a lot of stuff about trains, wanted to learn more and all that, and get involved. And he would just come up and hop right up on the engine, and no questions asked, no invitation, no nothing. Get up on the engine, get in the fireman's way, get in the engineer's way, constantly. And a lot of the guys at the museum were on the real nice side of things and didn't want to say, oh, hey, you need to be invited up here. Everyone was just trying to be kind and polite, but then it never stopped. And he kind of just assumed that he could just be up in the cab. And it's well, if you get invited up, that's one thing for a cab ride or a, hey, you want to come see the engine. But if you're new, and even if you're a volunteer and involved, don't just jump up and get up in there. People have to work a long time to reach that spot. That is one little thing that somebody may not say anything to you about, but I can guarantee you when the crew's going for a drink afterwards, that's all they're going to talk about.
And I do that to this day. I'm up there on the roster a bit, and if I'm not on the crew and I'm just popping in to say hi, and my buddy's in the cab, I'll still be like, hey, you mind if I pop up? Even if I'm just driving in to say hi, I'll still ask the question.
Right. Even if it's your engine, your baby, whatever, if you're not the crew for that day, that is not your responsibility. That's not your place. Ask the question if you really want to, but definitely not something that you should just go up and go straight ahead and do.
Exactly. Well, our oh no, continue. I'll take care of our run around.
Okay, I was just going to say, I started out at a railroad museum, and it was the same thing. I think I learned pretty early on to ask to ride in the cab, but of course most people don't understand that. I think the museum did a really good job of, for new volunteers, is that they would get each volunteer up in for a cab ride, whether on the steam engine or one of the diesels, and it kind of gave them a little bit of experience. But then it was kind of like, okay, unless you knew the crew or to ask, you didn't really get more cab rides until either you worked your way up in train operations.
Yeah, I try
Right.
and do that for the new people too. Every time I see someone new, I try and get them up into the cab. Don't tell my management about this, but when we're sitting in the station, I show them how to use the scoop and let them throw a little bit of coal into the fire. Because I think that's a fun way of getting people hooked.
Right. That is so important in this industry from what I've seen is getting people that thing, because the reason that they're coming to this place, museum, tourist road, whatever it is, getting involved is because they love this stuff almost all the time, right? They're history with trains, whatever. They want to come get involved, and getting that initial energy to start and show up is actually kind of daunting for folks a lot of the time. And so to give that little reward, that's a great way for people at our level to ensure that these people want to stick around. And then when the etiquette thing comes in, is like, hey, you're new, we want you to know what this is about, but also know that you have to work to get here, right? There's a process. You have to understand so many levels at the base of the pyramid before it's relevant for you to be up here. Like, if you were to take somebody new off the street, never railroaded before, and say, okay, well, we're going to train you on being an engineer, there's no way to do that, because you have to understand everything else that starts first to get there. So enjoy the experience, but don't stick around assuming that that's going to be every day, until you get there, right? Because that's what you got to work for.
I spent a lot of time, and we were just talking about this with a group earlier, just cleaning the engine early on. And that was like my first job. Like getting involved was like my job was to clean the engine and keep the rods clean and learn what everything was. Kind of like an engine wiper position. And I maintain that's still the best thing, the best job to learn everything about the steam engine is just clean it. Look at all the parts, look at what looks right, ask questions when there's time. And I'm sure that goes for class ones or as well. And when you're starting out as student, as a trainee conductor, ask questions when you can, but just look.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the museum I was at, it was one of those things where you started out as a car attendant. Then, if you wanted to go into train operations, work your way up to brakeman, and then from brakeman you could either go conductor or into engine service. And if you're going to go into engine service, you had to basically be an engine helper first, wipe down the engine, help oil it, um, basically do all the grunt work so that the engineer and the fireman didn't have to, so they could take care of everything else with it. And I thought that was a really good way to kind of get into it.
Yeah. Now, uh, Rick, how did, because you're on you're on the historical society page. So
Mhm.
what's it kind of like for new guys getting involved with your society? Like, how does that usually end up happening?
Yeah, getting involved, I feel like in a historical circle, is definitely a little bit different, than getting involved with nuts and bolts, railroading. And I've had that experience as well, working for a tourist railroad. But yeah, getting involved with the historical society, really, I think the big hesitation or the big roadblock for a lot of people is just getting involved. I talk to a lot of people that are my age or younger, in their mid 20s, early 20s, late teens, that are very passionate about railroad history. They might have their own collections, or they might be involved in various forums and groups. But when you ask them if they're a member of their local historical society, or the railroad historical society for the railroad that they're interested in primarily, a lot of times they're not members of those groups. And I think just becoming a member of the group is the biggest roadblock, and finding out how to get involved. And basically, the way that I did that was just to go to board meetings. A lot of times, the board meetings are public. You can go and sit in on them and listen to these older generations of members talk about the various ins and outs of the operations of these groups. And a lot of times, there's vacancies on, the board of directors, or, there's openings in volunteer groups or committees. And kind of similar to what we were talking about earlier here with just being present, being around and asking questions, and sort of uh, getting involved by just first like attending things, and maybe riding in the cab of an engine. For historical society, just going to a committee meeting and sitting and listening and sort of absorbing everything, and then from there figuring out whether you want to be more involved in that group, or you might have experiences that you can bring to the table. Maybe you've got tech experience that the historical society isn't tapping into. Just kind of taking that first, saying, I've been a card carrying for this group, but maybe I really ought to go and do it, just immerse myself in it.
That's really interesting. Like, I guess I never thought of like board meetings as a way of getting into the historical society side of things. Because I know there's plenty of organizations that I've seen of like, oh, you guys do cool stuff, but like, what is it that you do? So like, I never really joined or started following a lot of things.
Yeah, I think the perception that a lot of people have of historical, some historical societies or groups, others are definitely more immersive and public, but some of them tend to have a perception that these groups are black holes, that content comes in and sits in an archive and nothing happens with it. But I think when you go to board meetings and you listen to sort of the discussions of what's going on, what the committees are doing, that's where you start to see, okay, this group is digitizing this record this month, and then this group is going to be organizing the number board collection, or logging this donation, doing all the little things that you don't normally see or hear about if you're just following them on Facebook, or maybe getting the newsletter once a month or something like that. So it's a whole different world, I think, once you really step into these meetings, private or public meetings, and sort of listen to what's going on behind the scenes. And a lot of times you can, by sitting in on those meetings and figuring out what's going on in the background, you can sort of find ways to adapt your particular skills into what's happening, in ways that you might not know about if you weren't involved, directly with these groups. So yeah, it's a lot of times it's like a hidden history within history. A lot of these historical societies have dynamics of their own that groups, people just don't know about because they're not necessarily going and being involved. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of discoveries to be made, but like I said, just taking that step and finding out how you can apply your skills to these groups is really kind of a cool thing to be able to do.
That's fascinating. As a total aside, we're trying to get a hold of my dispatcher here to let us know if we can get out onto the main with our excursion. If you're listening in, Rudy. So a little bit tonight as we're getting out onto the main here. We're running an excursion train. Very classic. We got a gon up front, a couple coaches, a recording beverage car in the middle, and a nice obs bringing up the markers. Maybe a little bit of a shit post here with 89 on the head end, but we like to meme a little bit here on the VRA. So we kind of all started touching on this, but how did you guys get your start in being involved with railroads and preservation? I think we all have very similar stories with dad or grandfather got us to like trains as a kid, but how did you end up actually doing the thing? So they say.
I'll go ahead and go first. So I got my start at a railroad museum. I had been a member of the museum since I was probably 2 years old, and one of the later on, I didn't go to the museum as much as I got older, but later on I was with Boy Scouts. We were doing a community service project there at the museum, and I had stayed afterwards just to speak with some of the volunteers about volunteering. And one of the gentlemen was nice enough to walk me around the grounds, talk about the difference between being a docent and being a volunteer. He showed me around, got to meet several wonderful folks, and I was kind of hooked. I started volunteering on maintenance of way and car department. Later went into train operations. and it was a really great time. The one thing I loved about being at a museum was getting to learn all the different crafts and different types of jobs. Uh, Ultimately, I loved train operations the most. And then when after a while, I'd been there for probably 5, 6 years before I went to the short line that I'm at now, uh, and started out as a conductor and worked my way up as to engineer and then later manager. But that's kind of how I got my start. It's been so far it's been a wonderful career for sure.
Very cool. I guess I think Mark, you're up next in the Discord call list.
Why not? Yeah, so I basically moved across the country for college based on steam train stuff. Like, I'd never heard of the college I went to before. I'm from Seattle originally. Never heard of the Colorado School of Mines. And if you haven't heard of it, it's kind of regional. It's like School of Mines, like mining. What? And then people always make jokes about bombs or mines or mimes or something like. Right, doesn't make sense as an engineering school. But I realized pretty quickly with like a matching software that was like kind of like a dating app, but for you in college that my high school had for whatever reason. Oh, the School of Mines is in Golden, and 346, my granddad's favorite steam engine who got me into this, is in Golden. So it's like, okay, well, we got to go look at the school at least. And ended up going out there, realized it was a great engineering school, and there's trains, 2 miles down the road pretty much. So, okay, I guess we could work that out. And I listened to my dad's advice of first semester, just get used to college, and then, dive into the trains if you feel like it from there. But my first semester, I'd met a guy who was a complete, utter dork wearing a Norfolk and Western 611 t-shirt in the lunch hall at college. And I was like, man, if this guy has enough guts to wear a 611 t-shirt out in public at college when it's early on in the semester and everyone's trying to be cool and figure out the social atmosphere of things, and you're being a nerd amongst engineers, I can go talk to this guy. He probably likes trains. We'd probably get along. And that guy's a guy named Leighton, and he was a volunteer at the Colorado Railroad Museum, and he jumped in the first day. And so second semester rolled around, and right at the end of the week, I had a class with Leighton. And they're going round robin intros for, oh, who are you? What's your major? Blah, blah, blah kind of thing. And Leighton picked me next and said, also, you better come to the Railroad Museum with me this weekend, or I'm going to get my hide tanned or whatever, because he had put his name out for me to get me into the museum and everything with management at the time. And so I went on Saturday and Sunday, and then every Saturday and Sunday thereafter. It was just, this became the ritual, got into the social aspect, kind of learned the people, got along with everyone that was there, had fun, learned stuff about trains. And yeah, I have Leighton Moreland to blame it. One of the 3/4 of an idiot if you watch my channel, so.
That's very nerdy. Just like an extra level of nerd, and I love that.
What can I say? That's just everything about me, pretty much.
Well, Rick, how'd you get involved? And you're now you're like one of the youngest VPs of a historical society too, so I think this is extra cool personally. But like, because like you don't hear of like people our age, late 20s, early 30s being VPs of historic societies. It's just so like how did you get involved? How did you get there?
Yeah, it's a funny story actually, because the person that got me involved in both the Winnipesaukee Scenic and the B&M Historical Society is my friend James. And he's actually a couple years younger than me, and he's the president of the B&M Historical Society. So the two of us are kind of in charge, at least on the board of directors. But we're several decades younger than the next youngest member. But he got me involved with the Winnipesaukee Scenic first. I remember when I was a junior in college, I had applied for a position at the Winnipesaukee Scenic as a car attendant, or a car host. We served food back then. That was pre-COVID. It's the Winnipesaukee Scenic is very different than some of the other tourist railroads in New Hampshire. It's definitely more of a tourist railroad versus like a heritage railroad like the Conway Scenic. So it's definitely geared towards sightseeing on Lake Winnipesaukee. It's just a diesel, just a Burlington Northern SW, some old Bud cars, and some Erie Lackawanna MU coaches. So it's pretty basic. But the goal is definitely tourism there. So I had applied for a car host position. I really wanted to be in train service, but they didn't have any openings, and they were always short-staffed in the summers for car attendants. So I had called and wanted an interview, and they had told me they were going to get back to me, and it took a while for them to do that. So I ended up meeting my friend James in the interim, and he was a conductor there, so he kind of advocated for me and got me in the door as a car attendant, and then eventually I worked my way up to brakeman or fireman, and then occasionally conductor as needed. But as far as the Historical Society is concerned, I came into it in a different way. I was friends with James, and I had written a book on the railroad history of Manchester, New Hampshire, which is the largest city in northern New England population-wise. And I wanted to get it published through a Historical Society, but I wasn't sure which one to get it published through. So he brought me to a board meeting and helped me make a case for publishing the book through the Historical Society. It was actually at that board meeting where I discovered that they were short. They were actually short officers on the board of directors, and so I signed up to be an officer. And then a couple meetings later, I signed up to do the newsletter because the newsletter editor had retired. So I took that on, and then that was about 4 years ago. And then last year, we both ran for president and vice president of the board of directors. So it was just basically getting involved through knowing people that were there, people that I had a connection with. But very grateful for the opportunity that he brought me into in terms of the tourist railroad, but also getting my foot in the door at the Historical Society. But you don't have to know somebody at these organizations to get involved. It does help sometimes, but if you are able to at least go and present yourself, usually I found that works pretty well as well.
Yeah, that's one thing I found is that you can just kind of walk in and if you start making conversation with the crews on the engine, or you poke over to the shop and just be like, okay, how do I get involved? Most of the time I don't want to say desperate for people, but they're very much like, oh, you want to get involved? Here, fill this out so that way we have your information and you're under our insurance. We just got to make sure you're not a terrible person, and let's do this.
Yeah, and if they see you poking around, and they kind of recognize your face when it comes to maybe an interview or something, you have a little bit more credit, I think, in that regard, because they know that you're interested and you're at least willing to put the time in to be there. So definitely helps.
Absolutely. We get people showing up all the time, and quite frequently people ask about, hey, how do I get involved? And it's as simple as filling out a form and then talking to the volunteer coordinator. For us, like, that's it. And people come up and say, like, hey, what do I got to do? All of the time. But then the return on, well, are they actually going to show up? That is what we lack a lot of the time. We don't see folks actually showing up and doing the thing. We see people that have the interest and want to, and they put it kind of on a pedestal in their head, and then they just kind of leave it there, and then they don't end up showing up. And literally, the barrier to entry is just a form, a conversation, and then come show up, get dirty, have fun, like, let's work on some locomotives. That's literally everything that goes into this. Okay, yeah, you're not going to be pulling the throttle day one, but there's always a need for someone. You have some skill that's going to be of value, or if you don't have any practical skills, we can teach you, and we can teach you these things and get you up to speed on the stuff. And yeah, sometimes you start with the simple kind of monotonous things like scraping a frame that needs to be painted. Hi, been there, done that. But that's where you gotta start sometimes. And if you really want to come do this, stop saying that you want to come do it and just come do it. Go say hi to the guys at the shop. Go do the thing. Find the thing. Get the application. Come show up. That's all it really takes.
I think, and I think that's it applies not only to the museums, but I think to the short lines as well. I think my experience as a manager and trying to hire folks, obviously it's a little bit different when you're working hard, and that it's also a career. But most people, once you show them what the job is and they go out there for a couple days or a week or whatever, then they go, wow, this is really hard. I don't know that I don't know that I really want to do this. And you get people that then you have a high turnover rate, at least is in our case, especially for maintenance away. Uh, so I think the getting people to learn about the industry, whether it's a museum, a short line, or a regional, or even a class one, I think that the turnover rate is kind of going to always be high because you're not really going to have you have people that are interested, but I think getting them to stay is always hard, no matter what level of the industry you're in.
I think that everything you just said is absolutely applicable to the class one at BNSF. I mean, I was mechanical foreman for 3 years at the shop up in Seattle, and there was a point where the shop counts were going crazy. They're pulling all units out of service. We're getting a lot of traffic in 2017, 2018. And I mean, we couldn't give jobs away. I mean, it was ridiculous with Seattle and the price and everything. It was kind of hard to be competitive with the exact union wage that was the same all the way across the railroad, right? That wage in Seattle doesn't go as far as it does in Nebraska. But I mean, it really was a, do you have a pulse? Can you pass a drug test? Okay, we will teach you the rest. You know, we weren't in train service in mechanical, but I mean, we had several folks who signed up to be apprentice electricians who didn't know electricity at all, never worked on it before, but they were smart. They passed the interview tests and everything, all the questions, and it was like, okay, no, these guys could probably learn this. And they turned out to be great electricians. Like the barrier to entry is not there, you know, as long as the railroad's hiring. Class one sometimes, though, that's maybe not the case. And that's a whole nother. We could talk about that probably as an entire separate podcast at some point.
Oof.
But definitely the same thing, where it's as simple as pass the drug test. You may not even need experience, have a pulse, and be willing to show up. And then you get taught on the job. Like with railroad, everything. The railroad has their own schools. BNSF has a college in Kansas City that is an entire school to teach you everything you need to know, whether you're a machinist, an electrician, a conductor, an engineer. Like, I think that's the most common question I hear in this realm of things is, well, what college should I go to? What class should I take if I want to go work for the railroad? And the answer is don't. Go work for the railroad. And if you hate it, then you can go to college. But maybe college is not your thing, and that's a whole other topic. But yeah, the barriers to entry are really, really not as high as they may seem from the outside.
No, they're really as low as just show up and keep showing up. I have friends who, when our track superintendent retired, our railroad sent him down to track school in Chattanooga. It's like, all right, cool. You like the people who worked under him. We're sending all three of you to go to track school, and you guys are gonna have a certificate from the people who teach the MOW crews for the class ones. And it's just, and we're a dinky little short line. So it's, you get your education while you're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a railroad operations degree from a community college here in California. Like it's one of probably the only community college or college in the state, or probably one of the few in the whole country. And realistically, there were a lot of people that went to that class or that program because they thought it was interesting. But I think only a very handful of us, I think out of my group, there was 25 to 30, I think, that went through the whole program. And only 4 or 5 of us ended up working for the railroad, and 2 of us are in management. I mean, going through a program, it's great. You get to learn a bunch of different aspects about the railroad, but it doesn't really teach you necessarily about working for the railroad because, as Mark, as you mentioned, that the railroads teach you. I mean, they teach you everything that they want to know, and every railroad does it differently. So, going through the college doesn't necessarily help with anything. I think really more, if anything, it probably hinders folks, I think, from learning because they go, well, I learned it this way in school. And then you get out to you hit the ground and everyone goes, well, that's not the way we do it here.
Oh man, that is
Oh.
That is some powerful PTSD you just triggered on my end. So, I mean, my start at BNSF was right out of college, management trainee program. And so it's kind of like BNSF's own college right afterwards. It's short-lived, couple week long and whatever. And they show all the executives off to you. You get to meet the CEO and listen to presentations and look at how you're going to be the next generation of the railroad, all that stuff. I had a class of like 30, 35 of us. I don't know the numbers on everybody because it was all different departments on who's left on the railroad, but it's very few. I know for us in the locomotive shop, there were 6 locomotive shop management trainees, and 2 of them are still with the railroad 6 or 7 years later, whatever it is. Only one of them still in locomotive shop. The other one got a job in a different department that was more in an office because the experience, you have to go do it to understand it. You can't learn it in the classroom, and they can't teach it in the classroom either, because I remember asking the mechanical folks, BNSF HR, like, hey, so like, what does the job actually look like? Like, what are we actually gonna do? You're giving us all this corporate mumbo jumbo and all this stuff and all these great things about what BNSF does, but like, what is my job? And it took me getting to the shop and following other supervisors to understand, oh, this is the actual routine of the person in this position. Like, this is what you have to do. You have to see it. They don't know, the corporate people, the people at HR, they don't know the schedule. They don't know how the shop works. They don't know the shop politics. They don't know what it is day in and day out. And guess what? It's absolutely night and day different from Interbay in Seattle to Corwith in Chicago. Like, everything is different. So there's no point in them teaching it at that sort of level or at a college sort of level, because it is something that is so based in tribal knowledge. And that is like, that it has been the railroad since day one, and it'll probably be the railroad until until humanity implodes or something. Like, I don't see the railroad ever changing. Very tribal knowledge. So anyway.
It's interesting too, like you guys were talking about. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead. I'll hop in after.
Yeah, just how different every operation is, and like you guys were saying, like learning it in a school setting or an educational setting where they have to obviously stick to a program and learn skills and everything to make sure everybody gets the same education. But then when you take it and apply it to all these different operations, there's just so many different things. I mean, just thinking about the state of New Hampshire, where on one side of the state we have the Conway Scenic, and on one side we have the Winnipesaukee. And we have people who come to work for us from that operation, and likewise we have people that go from our operation to work for their operation. It's only like 30 miles apart, but the way they do things there is very different. And sometimes when I was training people that had come from that operation, they'd get so hung up on the things they did differently there versus the way we did them here. Or even like reading our rules book, which was NORAC, which is a rules system for a bunch of different railroads in the area. And we'd read the rule book, and there'd be things in there that we would never do on our operation that they do on these freight railroads or these passenger railroads. And so just trying to like break away from that fixation on these bits of railroading that are never going to apply to our operation, because it's such an enormous universe. And some people really do, especially the really passionate, rail fans and railroaders sometimes get hung up on those things that they do differently at a different place. But you really just have to get your boots on the ground at the operation you're working at or being trained at, and just learn it from that perspective, because you almost have to go in it with like a semi-blank slate. Maybe know the nuts and bolts, but everything else you got to learn on the job.
For holy shit, Cruise Master, thank you for the 5 gifted subs, much appreciated. But that's actually what I was going to talk about, Rick. Was I switched from one railroad in Jersey to a railroad up in the New England, and just like how starkly different everything is, and like how the operations use all of the same stuff but entirely differently, was a hard thing to wrap my head around and get used to early on. And it was just like, why are we doing it this way? And weird things of like, you run your engine a lot differently than I've been taught. What? Why? Why are we doing it this way? And the question why ended up pissing off a lot of the old timers of like, like, I'm not used to this. I would like to understand why we are doing this. Do you know something that I don't know? I would like to learn. And that why question ended up upsetting a lot of people. A lot of the older, the train masters.
That is one of the interesting things that comes with the tribal knowledge sort of thing. And it can be an interesting environment in these more isolated areas, right? Like the railroads, there's interchange, there's different crews, there's different points, and even if it's a small short line to some extent, they're still going to see an interface with other railroads where they see how other things are done, and that's going to spur the question. But in preservation, you end up with these sort of isolated cells of, well, this is just one railroad that's, 30 miles long, 4 miles long, or 100 miles long, or whatever. And that's all they have and all they know. And maybe they're insular, or maybe they're narrow gauge and they can't interchange, right? And so the culture becomes, well, this is how we've always done it. And when you ask the question, sometimes that can be a little interesting. Because sometimes it might seem totally backwards to you, yet the railroads run that way for a long time. And sometimes it's fine that they have, and sometimes it's, oh God, how has this not caused a problem yet? Which is yet another different thing.
Oh,
and,
God, yeah.
We could talk about that for days, and we'd rather not get into that. But it's definitely one of the etiquette things is like kind of learn to read the folks you're going to be interfacing with. You never know what the culture, in general, the political, the social, the safety culture of the place you're going to go volunteer or work or whatever. You never exactly know what that is until you get into it and understand it. And sometimes folks might be open to trying new things and trying things that are more, better standard practices or better safety or that sort of thing. Maybe better training regiment to make sure everyone gets their own fair time versus an old boys club kind of thing where people just get picked because somebody likes somebody, which that does happen too, and the industry is not immune to that sort of thing. So there's a lot of little things that you kind of have to read when you go in to one of these organizations, because sometimes things aren't ideal and sometimes things aren't right or great, and that can really affect the way that things happen. And sometimes you need to be the voice for good and the voice for better things and try to push for those better changes, which is definitely a piece of etiquette. Do you know, like, okay, I understand what's going on here and I should say nothing, or I understand what's going on here and it's dangerous and I should absolutely say something. That's an interesting line to walk, and if you do this long enough and you go to enough different places, I guarantee you will see those different sort of things, socially, safety-wise, and politically, and all that stuff, which is, that is the dirty truth of the industry. People don't talk about it a lot, but, like, there are places that could use a little bit of reform, as it were.
Yeah, that's one of the things I learned when moving to my railroad was when to ask questions, but also when to be like, hey, like, why are we not doing this? Wouldn't that with brake stand, it ended up being a hot debate if you needed to actually dump the automatic when you're doing your seat box test in the morning. Cause it just, the law is just make sure the brakes are functional. Well, do you need to make sure emergency's functioning? And that became a big conversation that ended up coming out of the rules class that year. And ended up being a large debate, and there is still no clear answer on it from management or the CMO. But it was something I had learned at my previous railroad of like, yeah, no, that's part of the brake stand. You got to make sure it works. A thing I learned at my first railroad that I wanted to remember, and you kind of reminded me of it, Mark, was early on I was told by, I forget who, CMO, someone in mechanical management, was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and to use them in that ratio. And that has been by far the best piece of advice I've ever gotten in this industry, and use it to this day, and tell others to use it to this day.
That's
Yeah.
one of the best quotes I've ever heard.
Have fun using it.
Right. And that's the thing that everyone should know coming in, getting into this. Like, I'm sure a lot of the folks here that if you have found this nerdy corner of the internet, I can guarantee you probably know a fair bit about trains or railroad history or something. Like, you're passionate, you love it. I guarantee that you know a fair bit about it. But if you don't do this, I can guarantee you know nothing of what it's like to do it practically.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to respect and understand that. I think the biggest thing that will make you be a pariah or something where you will have a not good time getting involved is if you come in and, having clearly never done it before, don't know how to do the tasks, don't know how to make things work, don't know how the railroad functions, you've never railroaded before, is to come in and just say that you know everything. And absolutely no one who does this wants to hear you say that, do that. Like that. There is things about, like, okay, you know some history stuff, you know details about a railroad. Okay, no, that's cool, that's great. Let's chat about that. And that's a fun conversation over dinner, whatever. Have a fun time. But, like, if you come in and you're going to get into train service and you know exactly everything that's going on, use the ears. Don't use the mouth. Absolutely.
And to add on to that, when you're switching from one railroad to another, you also know nothing again. Because that railroad's going to work completely differently, with the same set of rules, the same set of engines. It's going to be a whole new railroad. So
Hey,
you
Casey,
also know nothing.
What's the hand signal for telling the locomotive to come towards you? Do you have one of those?
I
don't
do.
think you have one of those.
I have one of those.
Yeah,
It's-
but it's different than ours.
It is very different, and every time I see your videos of your hand signals, I let you know that you're wrong.
Well, you're wrong. See how this works?
This is
East Coast, West Coast. It's the whole thing.
I don't get the West Coast hand signals. Just throwing that out there. It makes no sense.
Honest to God, the East Coast hand signals using the lantern signals all of the time makes so much more sense. But here we are, stuck in our ways because we're the railroad.
There's
God.
something
on, Mark, to kind of expand on what you were saying, and then also Casey. When I first started out, I got a piece of advice from an old head. He'd been a manager he'd been a career railroader for 40 plus years. Unfortunately, recently passed away. But one of the best advice he gave that I love to pass along to everybody is that it doesn't matter if you've been railroading for a year, a decade, or 50 plus years. There's always something new to learn, and I try to take that to heart every day. And I think one of the things that goes along with that is that we should. I think as an industry we should normalize asking questions. I try to always instill with all the new hires that please never be afraid to ask questions. I'll never get mad if you ask questions, because that means, one, you're paying attention and willing to learn, but also I think that asking questions can also get us who've doing it for at least a while, getting us to think, why do we do this the way that we do? Is there a better way to do this? And I think that's just as good as hearing it from someone who's been doing it for 30, 40, 50 plus years.
That's absolutely so true.
Mm-hmm.
And ask those questions because they can result in good things. We recently had our safety rules class, and we explained all the safety rules and blah blah blah. Did the dog and pony show that the safety rules class and all that sort of stuff is. And one of our volunteers, who's actually our board president, asked me a question. The next day we were in the shop about blue flag, and it was like, well, you didn't blue flag the engine, and we're working on it. And it was like, well, that's in the rule book, but we didn't really follow it because it didn't really matter. Like, okay, the turntable can't align to us, and we're a dead steam engine that can't make ourselves move. But it is in the rule book that you should do it this way. So why aren't we following our own? Oh, no, that's actually a really good point. And then it harkens back to the class one of oh, no, yeah, no, you always do this regardless. And you do it because the rules are written in blood. And, oh, if you start adding the little qualifiers of oh, this can't happen, all of a sudden you have a problem. And so asking those questions that might seem like a simple question, we do need to get normalized, I agree, because that can spur on a better safety culture. And it has for us, even at the museum very recently. So 1,000%.
There was a big thing for us when I first started was no one called switch positions or crossings. There was no, because we all have gated crossings, and no one called switch positions. So that was one thing of like, hey, how come we don't do this? And then that very winter, we put a train through, we put one of our 3 Christmas trains through a switch and derailed the parlor car. Wreck train. Scrap train. Nice. Nice to whoever did that on the other end of things. I appreciate that. But after that incident, everyone went, oh, you know what? Casey has a good point. And it became a thing in the rulebook of like, you need to call every unprotected crossing. You just need to acknowledge that lights are working where they work. But unprotected crossings, you need to call. I needed to call every switch. And that was a huge safety thing that came out of me asking a question.
Yeah, as soon as you said that people didn't call that, my inner cockatoo happened.
Yeah.
The crest came up and I went, what?
I know the GIF you're talking about.
Yeah, yes, precisely.
And no, it's such a bizarre thing of like, I can't see anything. I want you to say clear. And if I hear anything other than clear, I'm putting it in emergency. Well, I guess no one else has anything else about that. Our next question is, what was the first rule you learned when you got started?
First rule.
Yeah.
Hey, you're asking me to recall 11 years ago? I don't know. I probably think it was probably. Now, again, as a West Coast person, I've got G-Core, but I under my belt, I'm pretty sure it was G-Core, 1.1.1. When in case of doubt or uncertainty, always take the safe course.
I did mean like metaphorical rule. First thing someone told you of like, hey, don't do this, or if you want people to get along, do this.
Well, I mean, in that case, metaphorically, I think the first rule that I learned was that older manager, saying there's always something to learn. I think the other thing that I learned kind of myself is be willing to do anything. Obviously there are physical limitations, and there's always, maybe you don't necessarily agree with something or in the rules, but always being willing to learn new things. And I think that kind of jives with the, asking questions should be normalized. But, just, asking, hey, can I learn how to do this? Can I learn how to, even if it's something as, can I learn how to wash the locomotive and learn how to wax it? Can I learn how to get up, on the nose of an E9 and wipe down the windows? So I think that was probably one of the first things I learned, and I think that's helped me, throughout my career.
That's one of the best lessons anyone can take away from if you take away one thing from this stream and you want to get involved, be ready to do anything and everything. Use your smart judgment. Don't be jumping off a bridge because management said to. Don't do that. But if there's a dirty job, something you've never done before, and you get briefed on it, be ready to go do it and understand it. And that's how you really get involved. I had never really worked on stuff before I started on working on steam train stuff. I'd done a couple little projects here and there, but nothing huge. I wasn't really a craftsman or anything. I had no real skills. But I said, yeah, I'll take the needle scaler that looks like it's going to vibrate me across the shop, and I'll climb under the frame and start blasting away at the darn thing. Sure. Yeah, give me the putty knife. I'll go scrape the lead truck until all of the gross chocolate that's accumulated since, the engine last ran in 1963. Sure, I'll go scrape that off. So you learn that. You learn, hey, this is the job that needs to get done. Well, guess what? If you're in preservation railroading especially, There's always another hat to wear. There's always something else that needs done, and the railroad will take everything that you'll give it. And if you're doing it for fun, be wise about that. If you're doing it for money, be wiser about it, and don't let the railroad take everything. That's another thing. But yeah. And I guess while I'm here, I'll share my embarrassing anecdote of first rules that we're talking about. First rules. I don't know if anyone knows this, save for the interaction I had with the boss at the time, who goes by the Great Stromboli on my channel, if you're familiar. But make sure you take the sticker of the size of your overalls off when you're going to go volunteer for the first time. Because everyone sees they're clean, right? But, like, they don't need to know that you just bought the overalls and you're really that much of a greenhorn. Because, yeah, you might have a stupid, awkward interaction.
And this is actually my first rule. When I got my first pair of bibs, CMO told me, looked at me, and looked at how tall I was, and said, cut the hammer loop off of those right now before you go touch anything. I'm like, why? And he had me come stand next to the tender, popped the cut lever, and dropped it. And you want to know what it landed in? My hammer loop. It was at just the right height. So my first rule was like, be conscious of what you're wearing to make sure it's safe to be around moving parts. And I'll never forget that. And to this day, if I see a newbie with a hammer loop, and like, you're only using that on the steam engine? Yeah? And hand them a pair of shears and go, cut that off, and then show them why.
What's it like working on standard gauge when the couplers are so high?
The couplers aren't high. I am 5'5". I am short.
Oh yeah, but your coupler height's also probably 4 inch higher than ours.
This is true. This is also true. They are just slightly larger. We did the math, and one of our mics maths out to a K36. Identical, like in scale, it is the same size as the K36, and it makes the 36,000 pounds of tractive effort. So it's like, oh, this is a standard gauge engine that's the size of a narrow gauge engine. I'm not sure if it's impressive or disappointing.
Yeah, but the coupler height's more than 26 inch regardless, I'm sure.
Probably. I'll get a tape measure next time, okay?
You don't know that off the top of your head? What?
See, even I don't know everything. I'm still learning.
Look at that.
Moral of the story.
I think the first thing that I learned that I really remember sticking was, it wasn't so much a rule as it was just a piece of advice that just to always be observant of the route as we're passing over it. Because at the lake we have, it's probably about 20-mile total round trip, but you go through the same spots 3 or 4 times a day, and sometimes in the summertime, in the heat, and there's rocking back and forth, and it can get a little monotonous, but always pay attention to every as much as you can, where people are when you go south, when you come north, try to remember where they were to see if they're still there, or how close something is, how close a car might be to the rails, or a board between the rails or something. Just always be paying attention to all the little things, because you never know when something is going to be out of place or different. No matter how many times you're going back and forth, whether it's tourist railroading or whether it's just sightseeing or something like that, just never get complacent and always pay attention. And there were a couple times when you would notice something that would be very out of place, but most of the time it was just pay attention to the track, pay attention to the surroundings. If you have an area where there's a lot of traffic, where there's a lot of pedestrians, pay attention to that, but also places where there aren't. Because I feel like the closest calls that I can remember were places that I would not have considered high traffic areas, or places where I would expect to see people or things close to the track. So just always being observant was like one of the unwritten rules. It wasn't in the rule book necessarily in that context, according to our line, but something that I always tried to keep in my mind whenever I was working on the train.
Complacency is such a... And that could be a whole other episode in and of its own. After the accident at Strasbourg this past fall, complacency was a hot topic for us going into Christmas, where you have people who are doing train service for the first time all year, or doing train service in that position for the first time. So, God, complacency.
Yeah, that's an entire different podcast.
It seriously is, but it's still a great topic. But yeah, don't get complacent. And that's a rule to remember for your entire career. My God.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something else, probably right around the same time that I learned probably to, uh, you know, volunteer or try out everything. I think another good rule is we're all rail fans. We all have a passion for trains. That's why we're why we're all in this. But I think a good thing is don't rail fan when you should be working. There's a time and a place for it, and that is when you're off the clock or off duty. Otherwise, when you're at work, you need to be focused. On work, your head needs to be in the game, because otherwise it just leads to accidents, people getting hurt, you yourself, or someone else. And I think that's something that it's something I try to stress to new hires, whether they're a rail fan or not. I find at least in the short line world, we get new hires that have never done anything with trains a day in their life, and they may not even necessarily be interested, but they're there working, trackside, and the train's rolling by, and they might want to take a photo or something. And I think it's something to definitely remind them that, hey, this is not the time or the place, and I think that's also a really important rule for folks to know when they're starting out.
That is an
God, yeah.
point. Excellent. I mean, the amount of times that folks, you're so ingrained to your cell phone at this point in society. The amount of time that folks go, oh, I could just snap a quick pic, whatever, hop out and do the thing. In any position, like on the railroad, you absolutely head's got to be in the game the whole time when you're doing this. And that doesn't matter if you're the engineer, the fireman, the conductor, the brakeman, or the station attendant. You're in this here. If all the movement stops, nothing's happening, you're not on the schedule, you're not leaving for another 10 minutes, okay, phone, take a picture, enjoy the moment. We do love that. We are rail fans. We love that. Enjoy that while you can, unless you're maybe the station attendant and you're helping folks load or whatever, right? But as soon as things start going, have your head on a swivel. If the train's running by you, I don't want you trying to take a picture of it. I want you doing a roll by. You're in train service. Let us know that everything's right. Let us know that we're not dragging, we didn't decide to drop a bottom rod because our cars are ancient. Please be doing that sort of thing, because you never know when that's going to happen. And yeah, okay, the safety is a game of ridiculous uncertainty and, the 1 in a million. Okay, but the 1 in a million is what kills people. And do you want that to happen on your railroad on your shift? No, you don't. And that's why you have to have your head in the game every single day, every time you're doing this. Don't be focusing on something else. We had a couple cool events recently at the museum, Colorado Crossings, and then Father's Day. We ran a huge training for Father's Day with 491. It was this is awesome. And I didn't film hardly at all for the YouTube, because there were people on the engine that I was training, that I was in charge of, working with. And that was more important than trying to put out a video or getting something done, right? I put out one video related to it, and it was when I said, hey, Jeff, can I be absolved from my responsibilities? Can I film something? And he's like, okay, well, I'll run it. Yeah, don't worry about it. Because when you're trying to do this thing, you have to be paying attention, because you're talking about moving hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of tons, depending on the whole thing about railroading, depending on what kind of, whether you're tourist railroad or class 1. And if you make a mistake, somebody can die. Just that easy. And so you really cannot be focusing on the other things. So if you're getting involved, whether it's the shop or an ops or whatever you're going to do, be there for the activity. Be present. Don't be looking at your phone. Don't be trying to foam and enjoy. if everything's paused, no work's going on, okay, yeah, get a picture, do the thing. That's important too. But as soon as the tools get picked up, as soon as things are happening, ears open, eyes open, mouth shut, learn. Be there, be present, make sure you're not in the way of anything that could release energy and harm you, because even when you're working on the engines, all of these parts are heavy, there's pinch points, all of these things will hurt you or maim you. You don't want to be added to that list, particularly not in preservation. I'm doing this for fun and I lost fingers. Okay, well, why? Yeah. Don't become that number.
I can count on one hand the number of times I've actively foamed with a camera while working on the railroad. That's how, like, I don't know. I like being able to, like, turn off the phone as soon as my engine's out of the house and tied onto the train, and I know I don't need to call the CMO. Turn off my phone, throw it in my grip, zip it up, and know that, like, for the next 12 hours, I don't need to hear from anyone. I don't need to talk to anyone but who I'm talking to. I don't need to read any messages. I don't need to answer any phone calls. It's me and this completely analog machine, and that is such a relieving feeling. It's nice to turn off like that. And I think the one time I can remember actually foaming is during a Christmas season. I was hustling in the morning, and two of our steam engines were backing out off the engine house tracks together and going across the crossing together. And going away from me, my back's up against the shop building, and I'm just like, you know what? I need a photo of this. When has this happened in the last 20 years? In the last 100 years? Two steam engines backing out across a crossing together. On a cool winter morning with some light snow. So it was like, this is photo. Okay, what's next? And then moving on with the work.
Yeah, that's, and also for the fact that it's in the rules. Unfortunately, with the Chatsworth incident, bringing light to cell phones in the railroad industry, and over the last couple of years, they've made a couple of changes, whether it's a personal phone or a railroad provided phone or a personal phone used for railroad business. I think that's something that we have to make sure that we're watching out for ourselves and everyone. We're all a team, we're all working together, and we all want to go home safely at the end of the day. And that's definitely something that just needs to be watched out for.
Yeah, I think someone in the chat earlier mentioned the dollar amount on the FRA fine. $25,000 personal fine for getting busted using the phone while in hours of service, while performing in train movement. Like, $25,000 personal fine will bankrupt me. I don't want that. So that's a good incentive. All right. We've started getting into this, so we might as well move on to this one. What are the do's and don'ts you have in your current role for people starting out? And I'll kick off with my don't, because I can't. I'm having a hard time coming up with a do. But I was trying to find this to be able to scan it in and use it for tonight and have other people link to it. But it was in our engineman's training program, there was this paper written about railroad etiquette, about steam locomotive etiquette, and I cannot find my digital copy. And my hard copy's in my locker at the railroad, so that doesn't help me. But it was like all about like young firemen, what you're supposed to be doing on that side of the cab, and what you can touch, and where you can sit and stand. And it was like, you're the eyes for that left side, so pay attention to that left side. Pay attention to your pressure, pay attention to your water, but the third thing you're supposed to look at is that left side of the engine. And it was pretend there's a chalk line drawn down the middle of the cab. and you can cross that line when you're firing. But other than that, stay on your side of the cab. Don't go sit in the engineer's seat. Don't go hang out on the engineer's side of the cab, even if you're in a tangent. Pay attention to your side of the cab. Pay attention to your duty. So that really stuck in me as like a don't of like, or I guess also kind of a do. But do pay attention to these things. Don't come sit in my seat. You will get there eventually. Don't ask to run. If you're a student, don't ask to fire. Your instructor will talk to you about how they want to handle the day in some manner. So don't get greedy. Don't ask. That pushes you down the list.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of my don'ts is don't rush. We have all day to accomplish the job, the task, the switch moves. Uh, there's no need to rush, and if we don't get everything done, we have tomorrow. There's no reason we can't take our time, watch everything. There's never need to be rushing for anything.
Yep, this upsets some people at my railroad. But every time people are in a hurry about stuff that doesn't need a hurry about, like running so that way we can depart on time or whatever, it's like, we're a glorified switch job. We're going back and forth over 7 miles all day. If we're running a little bit late, we're running a little bit late. There's no one else out there but us. The only people who know that we're late are us. The general public is not going to freak out. So take your time and be slow and do stuff with intent.
Right. That doesn't mean absolutely dawdle, don't get
No,
anything done,
no.
and just waste a bunch of time. But in these levels of service, I mean, even on the class 1, like, there's nothing that you need to do that should over prioritize doing the task versus your safety. There is nothing. Even if the class 1, even if the BNSF itself needs to be saved, and you doing something faster would save the railroad, guess what? The railroad makes more money in a day than you will in your entire lifetime, and your kid's lifetime, and your grandchildren's lifetime. Like, don't worry about it. The railroad will be fine. Make sure you don't get hurt. Take the time. Be slow. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. That's the whole thing. If you do it right the first time, everything's going to go better than trying to rush things. When you try and rush things on the railroad, that is when things go sideways.
Yes, it is. It's God. The number of times I see new people rushing to get stuff done, because of just like a lack of time awareness of how long it takes to get a task done, of just like not paying attention to the oiling and only focus on their fire when getting stuff ready in the morning, and like developing that to be able to do it and not rush at the same time is a huge skill that you don't get it right away, and it takes, I don't know, a little more than half a year after getting qualified, in order to get to that point of being like, all right, I don't feel like I'm rushing to do this anymore. I know what I can do. I know, like, I can do the crank pins when we're out on the station because we can spot right before we make the hitch. I don't need to worry about getting them in the shop. So it's an acquired skill that you eventually get to.
Yeah, definitely.
Repetition makes things become easier and more natural and fast for you.
Oh yeah, I mean once you get qualified, qualified just means you're good enough to do the job. It doesn't mean you really know how to do it. You know how to do it after doing it for a year, and you can do things at a comfortable pace.
Right. The best example I have for that is not necessarily a safety-related thing, but it's a really simple mechanical thing that everyone should understand, and that is swinging a shovel. When I started firing, it was very much okay, I need to think, I need to see, I need to see where the coal's gotta go, and then I need to see where it went. Okay? Grab my scoop of coal, step on the pedal to open the door, pause, look down, see where the coal's gotta go, throw the coal, then look and see, okay, yes, I hit that spot. and I got qualified, and I was a qualified fireman doing pretty much that procedure. I fired up Cumbrace, the 15-mile, 4% grade on the Cumbrace and Toltec Scenic Railroad. I fired a K-36 up that hill and kept 195 bang on, pressure gauge bouncing around, safety valve that was clapped out, just feathering full open the whole time. Details. Anyways, other things. Did all that using that technique, right? Okay, stop, look, throw, look, boom, whatever, right? And nowadays, many years down the road, it is just grab the coal, foot's on the door, bam, coal goes in, and I don't look. I know where the coal went. I've been there, done that. I've got the repetition. I've got the experience. It's become fast because I know and I've done it, and I don't have to worry about that little thing. And worrying about it is like, it doesn't add a complacency aspect to it because it's just one of those things of you've got the mechanical skill locked down. It's like playing the guitar almost. You can now play through that thing. You can now do that thing. Congrats. And so sometimes the new fireman will watch me fire and go, oh my God, I can't throw coal like that. And it's like, yeah, and you won't for probably another 5 years. Don't worry about it. Yep. Like, when you get to that point in your journey, you will reach that point. But you've got to do this for a long time. And you will get there, and you will be able to do the job and get past the whole thing, but at a much lower level. And that is the part of mastering something that comes next.
I've seen a lot of firemen training students, and they're like, you gotta learn to read the fire, stop looking at it. And it's like, how do you think you learn to read the fire? You have to look at it. You have to go through that before you can just swing and throw and know you got there. One of the things early on when I was starting out was I would go down and help Fridays for fire up and be down on Saturdays as well. And fire up days, the CMO, after being around for a little while, goes, all right, I'm going to teach you how to hold a coal scoop, and you're going to learn how to bank the engine. And I spent almost a full season banking the engine on Fridays and Saturdays. The crew would come in, they'd be hot and tired after a 10-hour day, and I'd go, you guys need help banking the engine? And the fireman would hand me the scoop and go, all right, I'll let you know if you're messing up. But doing that helped me learn the mechanics of being able to get to where you need to go up against the door sheet, and how to translate that to everywhere else in the firebox, which was an invaluable skill, which helped speed up that process a little bit. But I think it's something good for everyone to know. And on the note of like getting good with something after a while is hand signals, and how to like be able to effectively communicate very detailed things with a very simple movement, of just being able to start really big with big motions and bring everything in nice and close and get them right up and pause and then dink that coupler in, so that way you don't spill the hogger's coffee that's hanging out on the windowsill. And that took me a while, and to this day I still do this. I talk to myself as I'm bringing them in, giving big motions, all right, half a car, 50 feet, 20 feet, as I'm bringing my hands closer together and just starting to use my wrists. 10, 5, easy, stop, dink. And like, I will have that conversation to myself. And the passenger standing next to me taking a video think I'm insane. But it's a very nice hitch. And doing that just made the job, it made it easier. It helps speed up, not the complacency, but being able to perfect the skill.
I just can't
Now,
believe
I gotta-
your half car is longer than our whole car.
Well, they're 85-foot cars.
Now I gotta ask, as you're talking about your countdown, are you actually doing the hand signals over there?
Yes, I was actually. I had my arms all the way. I actually did the half car elbow over here, and then kept doing the backup. We're all nerds here. It's fine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is a good do when you're working is own up to your mistakes. None of us are infallible. We all make mistakes, and I think owning up to them helps us learn from them grow from the experience and moving on. Uh, I think when you don't own up to it, you put yourself into a world of trouble, for sure. And I
Wow.
think that's just something that, even I've made mistakes. And I think it's just a matter of going, hey, you know what? I messed up. And this is how I'm not going to let this happen ever again.
I tell you what,
Yeah.
you know somebody's worked on the railroad if they know that lesson. That is a lesson for life in general. Like, you can
Oh,
get
yeah.
away with never doing that, right? Like, you can exist, but if you want to be a real person, that is something that you need to learn and live every way through in your life, not just on the railroad, not just at work. You own your mistakes always, and folks will be there for you. Like, then you are a genuine person. That is so critically important.
Mhm.
And that's a lesson I learned the hard way on the railroad. Yeah.
Yep.
So we one of my early days as a management trainee on the BNSF, we had a level 1 set out, which is a fancy term for the choo-choo is so broken that it cannot be moved. And it was stuck on the main line between New Westminster, Canada, New Westminster, BC, which is about Vancouver, basically, and like Bow or one of the northernmost points in Washington. It was almost on the Canadian border. Engine locked up the pinion, slid the wheels flat, and it had to get taken care of by mechanical. And this happened early on third shift, and I was a new guy, and I was like, I want to make sure I handle everything right. I don't want to bug upper management. Like, I want to make sure that like everything goes smooth, whatever. I'll take care of everything. And so I told myself, like, okay, they're asking for mechanical. That's us. We're Inner Bay. We're the closest shop. Mobile machinist's on site. Like, he comes in, and he's the guy that goes to respond to the stuff. He comes in at 5. I'm going to check with my machinists and whatever and make sure that it's all cool and whatever. So I called the guy that was on site. Good machinist, nice guy. And he didn't want to drive to Canada. Shocker. But I was like, hey, Dan, like, hey, this happened. Like, what's got to happen? He's like, well, they got to go and cut the pinion so the wheel will slide or grease the tracks and shove it to a siding or something. And I was like, okay, well, do you know how to do that? And he goes, well, like, that's not something that I do. I could probably figure it out, but, like, I don't know. That's something the mobile machinist would do. He wanted to make sure that he didn't have to drive to Canada and back on third shift, which, I mean, retrospectively, okay, fair enough. But I was like, okay, I took it at face value, like, oh yeah, the mobile machinist will be there, leaving at 5, so he'll be up there by about 7 a.m., which was 8 or 9 hours later of the main line to Canada being blocked because this train was stuck there. And I came in for work the next day, and I have never seen the break room door get shut faster, and the general foreman came in just about as hot-headed as I've ever seen a railroader, and tore my butthole out for that one. But you learn that from those mistakes, and you learn to own them and be like, okay, no, I did not understand the context of this, and I tried to make a decision. It was the wrong decision, and I didn't want to bug you guys, but like, okay, no, this was a bigger thing. Okay, we need to have a conversation about this. And you own those mistakes, and you own those things. And then when you have those conversations later, and even if you goof up just to that magnitude, it doesn't matter. The railroad will recover. The railroad will succeed again. Nothing catastrophic happened. No one died. No one got hurt. Okay, main line closed for a little bit, but just own it. Learn from it. Get better. Like, no one is perfect. No one is infallible. Like, learn those things and learn how to grow from them. And not to be embarrassed by them.
Yeah.
Man, oh man, you have the general foreman who I barely knew at the time. He came in just screaming at me. I was like, oh my god. You wanna feel like you're only an inch tall? Yeah, do that. That's how you feel that way.
Yeah. On that note, one thing I learned in the last couple of years when I was qualifying out as an engineer was don't be afraid to say, like, when you're not comfortable. Don't be afraid to be like, nah, I'm not ready yet. I need a little bit more time to cook. And that'll earn you a lot more respect than saying yes and then being super confused about what you're doing and messing something up. That's a huge thing, and it goes a long way. So
Yeah,
if you're not
absolutely.
ready, if you're not comfortable, say so.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think knowing your physical limitations and even maybe your mental limitations, knowing whether or not you know the job and know how to do it well. I think, or just not knowing enough of it. I think being able to honestly say that out loud is definitely uh, you're right. It definitely earns respect with your fellow employees.
And
Yeah,
with
definitely like
management.
being able to,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, just being able to like be vocal when you're like not feeling comfortable about a situation, even if you're a new employee. I remember right when I had started as brakeman or fireman. Um, it was one day in the summer we were running. We got to the end of our route where we have the runaround, and there had been lightning warnings. And so we got to the end of the route, and I decided that I would talk to the conductor about doing a shove back instead of a runaround because I was concerned about the lightning strikes. And the engineer was very adamant on doing a runaround versus a pushback. We have a boost with all the safety equipment and everything, so we can do shoves if we need to. And I was very uncomfortable with being on the ground, and the engineer was very adamant on doing a runaround, despite it not being his train, being the conductor's train. And he got on the radio with the conductor and started talking about what to do. And he was telling the conductor that he didn't think the lightning would be any problem. And then, literally, right as he said that, there was a lightning strike on the lake about 50 feet from the tracks, and we decided to do a shove. But just being, if you're in a safety situation, even if you're a new employee, and you feel like you're green and you don't know as much as the people that have been there for a while, if you're going to be on the ground doing things and you don't feel safe about the conditions or something like that, bring them up with not only one member of the crew but multiple members of the crew, so that you can get different perspectives and have backup if you do get pushback from somebody on something that you don't feel safe about.
I can guarantee you, without a doubt, if you were someone that I was training to fire, to be a brakeman, to whatever task it is, I end up training folks a lot these days, which is fun. But if you're being trained by me and you are honest and straight ahead about what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with, and if you're worried about something or you're not feeling great about something, I can guarantee you I'm going to do my darndest to make sure that we teach you what you need, give you the space we need, whatever, versus someone who says, oh yeah, no, I got this, and I clearly know that they don't. If someone says, oh yeah, no, I have this and I understand this, and then they make boneheaded kind of move, decision, kind of like not looking great, that is the easiest way to instill a lack of trust. Be honest, be upfront, like say what you know, say what you don't know, and be comfortable with what you don't know, because you're not going to know it all. But the second that it turns into, oh, I don't know this, and it'll be okay, I'll figure it out, that's how you end up in the dirt. That's how you end up killing someone. We don't play that game. So be upfront and ahead of with it. Like, don't BS me, because guess what? If you say you're comfortable with your hand signals, and your hand signals make me think of the scene from Napoleon Dynamite, where he is doing the Happy Hands Club and making the bird fly, I know that you're not comfortable with your hand signals. Shut the heck up, and let's teach you. Let's get you to the point where it's right. So.
Mm-hmm. And I love in those situations to be able to go like, all right, you're not comfortable with your hand signals? We will find time today to practice. If we're going to be hanging out waiting on a charter or something, or we're deadheading somewhere and hanging out for a bit, we're going to uncouple and couple to the train for the next for the half hour that we have time to do that. Engineer can watch the fire. We will practice your hand signals all day until you are comfortable with them. And just being able to take the time to do that stuff and work on the things that you're not comfortable with. Because as a student, the things you're not comfortable with are usually the things you need more work on. So it becomes a good teaching moment. Unless it's heights, you're allowed to be uncomfortable with heights, and I will never make you climb up higher than you're comfortable.
You know, one thing I think is always good. And I saw someone else kind of mention this in the chat. I think that as as experienced employees, whether we're management or not, we train new employees, and I like what someone had said about never yelling, never losing your cool, um, to always remain calm. And one thing that was uh, that I heard from someone that I thought was a great lesson that I try to always keep with me is if you ever have to yell, you've already lost. Uh, you don't have the respect of that person because now they think you're mean, they think you're terrible. I think that uh, calmly explaining something is always the way to go. And I think this also the next do I think is as those that we teach the new folks as they come into this industry is mentoring. Uh, One of the very first slides I think in all of our presentations is to mentor new employees. Never just tell them, oh, hey, go stand by that switch and and go throw it when I tell you to. No, we have to show them the correct way to look at the points uh, uh, before we throw the switch, to throw the switch, make sure that it's locked, that the lock is tested, and then looking at the points and the target again before we tell the movement, before we tell the train that it's good to go through the switch. And I think that's definitely something, more so for the experienced folks than it is necessarily for the new folks, but that definitely helps them out.
Mm-hmm. And this has me thinking about training programs in like all of our respective fields, and like how we bring new people on and get them trained up is so. I mean, it's so vastly different from railroad to railroad, but it's the I mean, teaching's just a huge topic in general. Like, what's the right way to teach? What are the right what does someone need to know early on? They're all huge, broad topics that we could spend probably another hour and a couple of beers on.
Easily.
Yeah.
There's it's been interesting at the museum these days, partially because of YouTube, which is hilarious, but just in general, we have a lot of new volunteers, a lot of new folks, a lot of new brakemen, a lot of new station attendants, a lot of people kind of qualling up to firemen. So much so that we ran like 20 trips the last time we ran all weekend, and every trip was fired by a student fireman.
Wow.
And they only got 2 apiece. So
wow.
It's like, holy crap, we got a lot of people that we're trying to qualify up here. But it's really interesting for me now, being much more involved in the training in a more formal way than ever before for me. To try and learn that and suss that out and figure out, okay, well, what is beneficial, what teaching style is right, and what's the right thing to do, because sometimes, somebody will do something on the engine that's not ideal. Maybe it's not even good, maybe it's bad, but it's not critically bad. Do you freak out? Do you immediately correct them in the moment, or do you wait and pause and correct it later? That's a challenging thing to do. I had a student engineer a couple weeks back, and they hadn't really run around the museum, but they'd run plenty of other places, and big train, big engine, everything, and it didn't quite have enough air under it, and we went down the hill going kind of quick and got into the entrance of the crossing. Crossing was protected, but we hit the crossing going pretty fast, and management came up afterwards and was like, that one trip was really fast. And it was like, yep, but when you're going downhill and you've got 100 foot left a hill, what am I going to tell them to do? Plug it? By the time they do anything to the brake valve, it will have been nothing. You know, we pulled up, stopped, finished the trip, and I said, hey, that one time we probably should have had some more air earlier. But in that moment, you don't say anything. Okay, yeah, we're going 12 miles an hour, which is over the speed limit and feels fast in a 28-degree curve, don't get me wrong.
Whew.
But it was safe and it was maintained.
Mhm.
We weren't going to go in the dirt. We weren't going to hit anyone at the crossing. There's no need to do anything else. I could sit there and be like, oh my god, you didn't have enough air. We're going so fast. But that would just be at the detriment of the training of that engineer. And it's an interesting thing to try and learn, because I was very uncomfortable that whole time. Like, oh my god, we are going really fast through this right now. Okay, but we made it around the railroad, and then I got to listen to management complain, and then I did not pass management's complaints along. Because that would just undermine the experience. When you're the engineer and you gotta learn these things, you have to learn the feel. You have to learn that. And you're not gonna learn the feel by someone saying, oh my god, yeah, blah, 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 by somebody else feeling it, freaking out, and screaming at you.
Mhm.
You have to learn it yourself. And that's so critical.
Yep, that's one of the things that I practically beg to have student firemen. I absolutely love teaching, and I don't know, I'm kind of surprised I haven't gone into education formally as a teacher. But like I love having students, and I love that they're all different, and how I teach all of them is slightly different. And it changes where you are in like your training program. If you're really new, I'm not going to, it's going to be more of a conversation of like, all right, what did you do wrong? Versus like, when you're getting close to qualified, if we're coming up the big hill and your pressure's dropping, I'm just going to keep an eye on the water level. And I am going to let you figure out how to save yourself. And then have a conversation when we get back of, hey, what happened there? And, keeping the stuff from management stays between management and me. That never gets to the student, because they don't need that stress of like, oh god, management is wondering why I smoked out I-95 as we were going under it.
Absolutely. That is your role as the trainer. Yeah.
I'm curious what it's like in your world, Rick, on the historical society side of how you guys train new docents or people in your archives, and how you guys manage that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely very hands-on. Normally, we have volunteers that come and want to be involved in the archives committee or the hardware committee. We have two. We have one that handles mostly paperwork and photographs and negatives and that sort of thing, and then hardware that handles, oh boy, everything from clothing items to locomotive parts to headlights to, we even have a wigwag stored in our storage facility. And they come to us. Some of them have experience, using spreadsheets or documenting or filling out information. Some people just don't have any experience, working with any sort of historical artifacts or any sort of records or archives or anything of that nature. And basically, it's a slow process. When they come to a meeting, their first meeting, usually we'll have them do something pretty basic. Maybe we'll have them transcribe information from the back of a photograph, or we'll have them, help move items around, and that sort of thing. And if we get the feel that they want to commit, more time to volunteering and being parts of the committee, we'll train them how to do the cataloging system, and we'll train them how to, where things are in the archives and where things go and that sort of thing. But it's definitely, we'll take anybody, in the historical community. Can't get enough volunteers. And it's just identifying what their strengths are, really. What kind of work are they interested in doing? What could their skills be best used for? Because there's always a million projects that have to get done. And it's just sort of very individualized instruction in that regard. And then, if they decide that they're not interested in archives or hardware, then they can go help the 410 committee, cosmetically paint and restore the 060 and the combine coach we have in downtown Lowell. So there's all kinds of different opportunities. But I think as far as instructions is concerned, it's really just sort of sort of highlighting the strengths and weaknesses that they have, and if they want to volunteer their time to be with us, their time is just as important as what we need. So how can we make sure their time is spent as effectively as possible?
Yeah, I really like that, because a lot of us do this as volunteers, some of us are paid, but it's how to feel fulfilled as a volunteer is very important to getting people interested, keeping them around, and getting them all the way through training, so that way they still enjoy it when they're done training and they may be out on their own doing a thing. Now, you do a lot of training.
And are these skills that...
Sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead. No,
No. You go. I was going to ask another question. You go on.
Sure. Yeah. Are these skills that they could take and apply to other areas of their life too? A lot of these things aren't mutually exclusive. Organizational or entering data on a computer or something like that. It doesn't have to be just within the parameters of a historical society. It should be enriching for the volunteer just as much as it is that we're getting something out of it as the organization, which is kind of similar to, I think, what you were just mentioning there.
Yeah. My first railroad I was with, the CMO very much thought of it as a training railroad. He wanted to lose people over time to go work on, Class 1 railroad, or go work on the local short line, or head on over and move out to Port Clinton and go work for the RNN. He liked that he trained people well enough that they were able to get a job at a big railroad. And I don't know, that always felt very rewarding to me. Being there was like, you know what, they're not afraid to lose me, and they're happy that I was able to go somewhere else, because that also means they have good relations with those railroads via us, the people who got out there. Yeah. Matt, I know we talked, and you do a lot of training as part of your job, correct?
Yes, yeah, I do quite a bit of training for every craft, because we have dedicated managers for the training programs, but since the division I manage is a little bit farther away from the rest of the railroad, I have to do all of the different trainings, whether it's shop, MOW, train crew itself, different safety trainings. I've taught it all, for sure.
And how do you guys, as a larger short line, manage that, especially being so separated?
For one, it's using the same program, the same slideshows, kind of the same. All of our forums are the same. We may do things operationally a little bit different in each division, but for the most part, the nuts and bolts is all the same. We make sure that we're consistent, and all of the managers, we all talk constantly, so that we're all staying on the same page. So it's helpful in that regard. It's also good in the sense that all of us in management all started from the bottom, whether we started out as a conductor or started out in MOW. One of the great things about the railroad I work for is we've all started from the bottom, so we all know the jobs, and it's also what helps us get along really well, so that when we're talking and talking about the different things that are going on, we're all in the know, and we can all help each other out with different things. So that's the fact that also that our training program has been vetted by the FRA, and that they're looking at it and making sure that it meets their standards and more, is always really good too.
Yeah, the FRA is a huge deal there in approving of training programs, which is a very comfortable feeling as the person being trained, is knowing that there's at least someone looking over all of this, maybe, and going like, yeah, okay, they're not doing anything too dumb.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think just staying consistent and learning a teaching style that works best for you, but also being able to adapt to the new hires and being able to also teach them in the way that they'll learn is just as equally important. Uh, I I one of the things that in my mind I always try to keep in the back of my mind when I'm teaching is that we, for the most part, I think everyone starts with the classroom work first and then goes out in the field. And as boring as the classroom trainings are, it's also the the baseline and the fundamentals that we are teaching the new hires, and I think it sets the groundwork for their career. So we have to definitely stay on top of it and make it exciting in a way. Uh, whether it's talking about real world, uh, whether it's talking about real world, things that have actually happened to us, scenarios, or talking about possible scenarios about what ifs. I think it's all equally important to keep them engaged so they're not falling asleep after you've been training all day in the classroom before you actually take them out into the field.
Yeah, the classroom stuff is important, and I think it often gets overlooked. One of the things, and Mark, you and I have talked about this, and when you get involved with heritage railroading, you pick up a new hobby of book collecting. But how important the textbooks are to railroading. And I can't speak to the present day because I work with the steam stuff. But you don't go to an ICC school anymore to work on your fireman's exam or to take an ICC class before you become an engineer. So being able to find those books and collect them and read them is really helpful to understanding how the steam engine works, how the brake system works, how the running gear interacts with the spring rigging, how the throttle acts under these conditions, how priming is, and the intricacies of water treatment. And that's important to learn and understand as an engineer. But I guess the question ends up being outside of the preservation side, how do these textbooks fall in as an importance role, and how big is your book collection? As the B question to that.
It's one of those things that it's always interesting to look at the historic rule books to almost compare how the things were done in the railroad back then to how they are now. Because of course you have the CFRs, which most employees will never know. As upper management, it's our job to understand the CFRs, to know the CFRs for the most part, or at least be able to understand how to look them up. But then we have GCOR or NORAC if you're on the East Coast. Then you have your operations, your air brake and train handling, your safety rules, and then of course you have your operations specifics. You have your timetables and special instructions, your general orders, your track bulletins, track condition messages, and I think it's definitely where the more you're in it, the more you start collecting, the more you start looking. It's always interesting to even compare NORAC to GCOR, and to see just kind of the way things are done elsewhere. It definitely the book collection definitely continues to grow all the time, and I think that knowing the differences helps make one a better trainer. Again, to be able to provide the different examples, and to kind of understand the why we do things the way we do, whether it's industry wide or specific to your operation or to your railroad.
Mm-hmm. That just made me think of this. Mark, did you guys have to watch the FRA's daily new inspection video after Gettysburg as part of your training program for rules classes? Because that's something that we make all of our new guys do, is they have to sit through that video of and learned what a daily inspection is, what a 1472, how to do a daily, and then they talk a little bit about the Gettysburg explosion.
No, and I have honestly actually never seen that somehow myself.
I will
So if
send.
you wanna-
I
if
will
wanna
send you
me
a
link,
video.
so I can indoctrinate the
Uh,
future here.
it's
You know,
a-
we talk
it's a-
about we
it's
talk
good.
about all that stuff, but
It's good old fashioned 144p VHS quality.
as you love.
It's 1998. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
But it's like that's something we start out on, of like new guys, of like, you don't need to memorize the entire CFR. You don't need to know what part 238 is, but you should look at part 230 and you should kind of understand what you're looking for and why, and then kind of leave it at that. As you're talking about all the different books you have, Matt, and I'm over here looking at my ABCs of Air Brakes Chalk Talk book, as I'm studying up some more on air brakes. This year is the new thing I've picked an interest in railroading. So my book collection ever grows, as I've become now a collector of vintage books.
And I think that also just kind of leads back to the no matter how long we've been in the industry, there's always something new to learn, and I think that even goes back to learning how they did it in the old ways, and why you can clearly tell why the rules are here today that we have. For example, the red zones, or 3-step for those railroads that do it. You look at the old railroad books, and it's just, okay, when the train comes to stop, go ahead and reach in there, lace up your air hoses, open up the angle cocks, and you're good to go. And we obviously can't imagine a world in which we would ever do that today. And you can see why we ask for our red zones, why we clear our red zones, or receive our 3-step and clear our 3-step. And I think it's just definitely interesting. And again, it leads back to the always learning something new, for sure.
Yeah, and that's why, and shameless plug for the VRA Discord. If you hit !Discord in the chat, that should be able to get you a link for it. If not, it's in the links of all of our videos up on the YouTubes, and I'll be in the link for this once it's a VOD. So shameless plug, because we do a rule of the day. Every day I can remember to do it. And I switch it up quite often between doing NORAC rules and doing some rules from my first Railroads rulebook, which used Pennsylvania Railroad Standard Code from 1963 still. It was almost the same rulebook. So I like switching up between those different rules to be able to show like how the rules evolved and be able to help generate conversations around those kinds of things. Because I think it's important to know where you've come from to where we are now, but also because standard code and timetable is cooler.
Very much so, and that's kind of where our rule book's at these days at the museum. We did adopt a new one a couple years back. It was in my time away from the museum when I lived in Seattle and played with 30 orange Kleenex boxes. But it was basically a Rio Grande rule book that was then looked over by an FRA inspector, who I can let remain nameless, sweetheart, and was long time over the safety side of the museum. Finally retired, good for him. But an updated classic rulebook, because sometimes a lot of the rules in the rulebook are really related to that level of railroading, right? Like, if you're going to be on a short line, you're going to interchange with the BNSF or the UP, or you're going to be running 1 million trains a day or whatever on the big railroad, or whatever you're going to do. Sometimes a lot of the rules don't make a whole lot of sense when you're talking about a half-mile loop of track in the middle of the Colorado Rockies, where we don't do much. And so we went through and curated a sensible set of, this is modern, no-brainer safety that we missed out on back in the day. But then some stuff is like, well, we don't need this because we don't have track circuits, we don't have signals, we don't have other sometimes we have other trains, and if we do, well, the 10-minute rule can't apply because being 10 minutes behind means you're being 4 laps behind. and
Oh,
that's not how that works.
That
You
doesn't
know,
that geographically doesn't make sense.
the math does not get up to you. So, you know, you got to have the rule book kind of scoped for the right level of the operation. But I think the point of it is that you need to be at the right level for that operation, particularly as a trainer. And the reason that us railroad dweebs collect the books and stuff and want to learn more is because having that greater context and understanding, okay, well, this is what the Colorado Railroad Museum needs. And then this is what the Class 1 needs. And then this is what Amtrak running 150 mile an hour with the Acela needs. Those are all three different sets of things that all have slightly different rules and slightly different implementations. And what might be common sense for you on a 10 mile an hour circle of track is not going to be the same as common sense when you're running the Acela at 150 mile an hour. And so being able to verse yourself in these things and learn all of the little extra details and at least be conversational with them as a trainer is really important, because the biggest thing that the people who really care and who are really analytical and really want to learn these things for real, the biggest fault you could give them is not giving them a reason for something. Well, why is our speed limit 10? Oh, because that's what it is. You've just now invalidated yourself as a trainer. Well, it's 10 mile an hour because the speed, you know, the curves are this, blah, 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 blah. Talk about it. Cool. Easy. Done. This is the engineering. This is the further thing. When somebody who really cares and really wants to learn anything, not just railroading, gets that answer, I mean, that is the easiest way to make them feel invalued, like you don't care or don't think they know. Or they're smart enough to know the reasonings behind things. So, you know, when you're training somebody as a fireman and you say, oh yeah, keep the water glass full. Why? Just keep the water glass full. It's really bad if you don't. Explain the thing. Give them the context. Understand, okay, well, if you do this and have this, okay, yeah, the boiler will explode. But if you have it full on the other end, too full, well, then you're going to prime. You're going to carry over and you're going to blow the cylinder heads off. Give them the context and learn the context as a trainer, so much so that you can successfully give that context so that people really learn. They may not be able to absorb those finer level details the first, second, or third time you're working and training with them. But if you're ready to give folks and people are ready to receive those finer level details, it will only help appreciate their understanding of how railroading works, how things work. Like, this is altruistic about everything, not just trains, but don't sell something short. Don't not give context for the sake of, oh, well, you're not ready to understand this, or I don't think you can understand this, because there's always a deeper level, and you have to be at the right level for your operation, but you also want people to get to that deeper level and appreciate things at that right level so that they can be more knowledgeable about what interactions they have.
Yeah, 100%. And
Yeah, that was really good.
piggybacking on that, of like, if you're the trainer and you don't know the answer to the question they asked, and this goes back to admit when you're wrong. Just be like, oh, I don't have the answer to that, but let's find out together afterwards. And pull out your book and read the thing. And see if you can
1000%.
find the answer.
1000%.
I was just about to say that, but yes, no, that's it's definitely, and again, it goes back to the we all learn something new every single day, or we learn new stuff all the time, and it just makes that more solidified, of the fact that we get asked something, we don't know the answer, and it's hey, I'm not sure, but we'll look that up and then we'll explain why it is.
That's, if you have time during the day and they ask a question about a rule, and you have a chance to pull out your rule book and read it together while you're between stops, while you're sitting at the station, while you're waiting on Class 1 to finish drilling the interchange so you can make your pick. Take the time and read the rule book together. Find out the answer together. Because as a trainer, I treat every person I'm training as an opportunity to learn something new myself.
And that in turn makes you a better trainer, and
It
that
does.
makes the employees or the volunteers, whoever it is on the railroad, makes them better railroaders, and that means that the railroad is going to operate more smoothly, no matter how big or small. Like, it's so important to do.
It absolutely is. All right.
On the topic of books, I do in fact have a Westinghouse Air Brake Company instruction pamphlet number 50,000, or so, not 50,000, 5,032, issued in November of 1932 on my desk right here, right now. 6ET locomotive brake equipment, because I was going to
Ooh.
reference it for a video, trying to double check myself, going, okay, I'm going to say this. Is this, okay, well, I don't know. When I called and asked management museum, asked Jeff, and I was like, hey, it was an easy question I was trying to look up. When you put the automatic in run versus release, when you put the automatic in run, does it directly connect the brake pipe to the feed valve, or is there a comparison stage in between of it connects to the main reservoir but looks to compare like a triple valve to the feed valve, and that's what shuts off the pressure? Because I wanted to make sure I said it right and explained it right in the video, and I was like, I'm not sure, because it might just connect to main res, and then when it hits the feed valve pressure, then it shuts off like there's a triple valve. And no, it just directly connects to the feed valve, but both Jeff and I were like, I think it's just the feed valve, but I don't know. So you pull out the book and you look. The biggest thing about old railroading is that you will only find the really in-depth information in books.
Mm-hmm.
You can find some fun stuff on steamlocomotive.com and the wikis, and okay, great, you now know the attractive effort and cylinder size and wheel size of a locomotive, but that does not tell you anything about the locomotive other than what it vaguely can do. That tells you not how to operate it, does not tell you how to understand it, feel it, any of that stuff. You need to go to the old books and pull them out and learn the things from there. You want to learn how valve gear really works? That's not on the internet anywhere. Like, okay, yes, there's a live Steam website where you can learn to set valve gear in. Yes, okay. There are a couple places these days. But for many things, you have to go to the book to really understand the nuance. And even what I've seen in the live Steam world, they don't quite have the full-scale nuance of lap and lead and Stevenson properly described and understandable on the internet. You have to go find an old book about talking about valves from the 1890s or 1900s or whatever, and that is where you're really going to learn this stuff. Spend a lot of time on the internet, spend a lot of time working on it, but like to understand the real finer points and to get that real next level of understanding with this older stuff, that's where you have to go. You have to learn the books and learn the names of the books. Like, I don't even know what book to look for, you know? You kind of have to learn that from your group of people, your friends, your folks that you know that do this, because they've all got collections of books that are bigger than yours. Ask me how I know.
And then your collection of books gets closer to their size of collection of books until you need a new book, and you call them, and their book collection has a whole new 4-shelf set built, and it's you're no longer caught up. Ask me
Pretty
how
much.
I know.
Yep, that's how that goes.
No, the books are important, I think. There's a reason the railroads did the international correspondence schools back in the day. There's a reason why you used to have to take 3 exams to become a fireman, 3 exams to become an engineer. So there's a reason for that. So books it's not all about on the job. There is some important classroom elements. All right. Last question before we wrap up for the evening. What advice do you have for someone who wants to get into doing the thing, get involved, whether it's going to work for a Class 1, a short line, your local tourist railroad, a museum? What do you say to someone who, after the stream, is going to go fill out an application somewhere?
Forgive me if I immediately sound like Shia LaBeouf, but just do it. Just do it. Midland's quoting me in the chat right now. If you want to go do the thing,
Look at that.
go do the thing. Don't put it on a pedestal. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the social thing. Don't have a regret. Don't have a worry about, oh, well, what if this? Stop. Go fill out the application. Go find your place. Fill out the application. It's probably online. Contact the person. They have an email for a volunteer coordinator, whatever, job app, whatever. Fill it out, send it in. They reply. You go do the thing. The biggest thing that I see is people that want to do it and put it too high up on a pedestal, and it feels like it's untenable in their mind. Oh my god, I could never do that. I could never, like, there's no way it's ever going to happen. I ran a steam engine for the first time when I was 19 because I showed up and did the thing. I put the time in, I showed up, came and worked, bang. I got to run a steam engine before I was legally allowed to drink. I never thought that was going to happen in my entire life. Come do the thing. We want you. We need you. You have skills. Maybe you don't, but sometimes you just need warm bodies too. And we're happy to teach people who want to learn. Don't have inhibitions. Don't worry about it. Just come do the thing. Sign up, show up, get dirty, learn, have fun.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's really good.
That's a hard answer to follow.
It is, you know, I think mine's gonna definitely not as good as Heis's, but I think, you know, whether you're looking to do it just as a volunteer, whether you're trying to make a career out of it, is just know that it is hard work. You know, this is not for the faint of heart. But I think knowing that it's hard work, showing up, willing to do the job, willing to ask questions, and willing to learn, I think is going to carry anyone in this industry extremely far.
I think
Yep.
as far as like the historical, you know, side of it is concerned, like think outside the box too, because a lot of times, you know, when you think about these roles or these organizations or even, you know, these railroads and that sort of thing, you have these roles and you have these responsibilities and you have things that definitely seem like they're, you know, set to a certain role or an obligation. But, you know, if you get involved with the historical society, I mean, you may not necessarily, you know, have an interest in something that everybody else in that group does, but there's probably something else that you can apply. So just think outside of the box. Think about how you can apply your own experience, your own, you know, path of life, your own skills. You know, maybe it's tech, maybe it's web design, maybe it's production, maybe you're interested in distribution, maybe you're interested in organization. You know, it doesn't necessarily just have to be, you know, dry old history, or if you're involved with a tourist railroad, you don't have to necessarily be in train operations. You could be in marketing, or you could be in, you know, maybe you're interested in food service. There's all kinds of different things that you can do. So yeah, go do it for sure, like I said, but do it, you know, with your own style, because I think everybody has something else they can bring to the table.
Yeah, all of that, 100%. Go out there and do the thing. There was one question I saw that I wanted to touch on before we wrapped up. Someone said, but I have ADHD and I overthink. Dude, I have ADHD. I take medication for it. It makes me a better fireman. I have to look at, I don't know, Mark, how many different things are you looking at when you're a fireman? At least 30?
Lots, but
At least 30 different things?
To left, water glass, fire in many places, and probably something else. I'm forgetting.
Something like that.
Steam
So
gauge.
you're
Yes, that one.
that
At
one.
least 4.
at least 4. So like I'm looking at all of those. I have ADHD. I am able to hone in so well because of that and pay attention that I'm tooting my own horn slightly, but it makes me one of the better firemen on our railroad because I have that. I'm just sucked into that. So don't worry about those kinds of things. If you want to do the thing, go out and do the thing. Is kind of the end of the story. I don't think we can put it any better than that, and have fun with it. It's a hobby at the end of the day, even if you're getting paid to do it. It's a hobby, so try and have fun with it. That's all I got. So thank you everyone out there so much for watching. Remember, join our Discord. We have a lot of new members tonight, so if you have your Twitch linked to your Discord, you get some special perks in the Discord, some private chats with me and the rest of the AM and W crew a special role, and you find out about streams about a little bit before everyone else. So do that if you got a sub tonight. Thank you for everyone who subbed. Thank you for everyone who is currently subbing. Much appreciated. Appreciate the support. And thank you to this wonderful panel, Matt, Mark, and Rick. It was awesome to have you guys on. This was absolutely a ton of fun. And just a great conversation and a great topic. I hope people from here go out and start working on the railroad. Get involved. Do the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
on.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes. Well, as always, I'm Professor Casey. This was the Virtual Railroader Academy. Have a good night, everyone.